Hello. The development of the Baroque idiom on the violin over the course of the 17th and 18th centuries involved more and more complex patterns and figurations for the bow. In fact, we often talk about studying the Baroque violin. Most of the time, we're talking about studying the Baroque bow, what it does, and how to best manipulate it in its complex, virtuosic feats that composers called for more and more, the barriolage patterns, the different articulations, etc. And it's no accident that Tartini, in his thorough book about the technique of the violin, with lots of double stops and trills, actually calls it l'arte dell'arco, the art of the bow. It's the bow, clearly, that makes the sound. Without the bow, the violin is silent. So the bow is constantly creating sound. Today, I'm going to talk about the wrist in its horizontal movement. The wrist has several functions: to play vertically when crossing strings, and horizontally when playing on one string, and of course various combinations of the two. But we're going to talk exclusively about the horizontal movement of the bow today. And it's very important that we isolate the wrist from the rest of the arm. Geminiani tells us we should use the wrist much. That's the word he uses. Use the wrist much. The arm, he says, but little, and the shoulder, not at all. To isolate the wrist from the rest of the arm and also from the fingers, I'm going to take an apple. If I take an apple or a tennis ball perhaps, and I place the fingertips together, not grasping them, but just placing them together, then I use just the wrist in this backwards and forward motion. And as I do that, I can go to extremes, as much forward and as much backward as I possibly can do. Rather like in the video that is on the YouTube site about the hinge and the springs of the right hand. Now, I can also speed up this apple bow, and I'm making sure that my body is completely neutral. There's no tension anywhere, and if I find there is, I just release the muscles, let it go. Now I'm going to move on, graduate from the apple bow to the pen bow. And again, I'm going to put my fingers together. That's not a very orthodox thing to do, but it helps isolate the wrist. And it becomes immediately apparent when I'm doing this that my pen bow is not going to be straight. In fact, it's going in and out like that. And that's my first task, is to find out how to make it go straight. And there, the fingers may act as a kind of suspension spring, helping the fingers, helping the bow go straight. Now, I'm going to do something even more unorthodox now. In order to isolate the wrist, first of all, the fingers together, again, not firmly grasping the bow, just the fingertips together. But here, something even more unorthodox. I'm going to put my elbow against my side so that my arm can move as little as possible. And I'm going to just move my wrist. I'm going to put the bow on the string and guide it along its trajectory. And I can check that by making sure it is parallel with the bridge. And I'm going to use the maximum amount of bow that is possible to use just with the wrist. Not the prettiest of sounds. And if I speed up, now I'm using just the wrist, and of course there's some reaction from the arm, but it's the driving force is in the wrist. Now, as I speed up, I can move away from the frog, and I can release the elbow clasp until I get to the middle of the bow, and now I'm in a normal way of holding. And I can also go down to the tip of the bow, and at the tip I can use the maximum amount again of bow, even slower, so that when I speed up and come towards the middle of the bow, I'm using just the wrist. Now, you may notice that I've taken the fourth finger off. That will help to free up the hand. And another tip is that the second and third fingers, the two middle fingers, should not be wrapped too much round the frog like that. That makes it very hard indeed. Bring them up to the surface of the stick, and you'll find that not only is the wrist freer, but the sound is freer too. So I'm going to practice from here and then releasing down at the tip and then coming back. And that should be my daily practice. Now, we need to try and coordinate the two hands. And I'm going to use the Opus 1 Shevchik exercise that I used in a previous video. And I'm going to play, first of all, 4 bows to every note, and then 2, and then 1 when I feel ready. So, I'm letting everything go. No tension anywhere, just movement in the wrist and in the fingers. I can make that more beneficial by improving the coordination between the two hands. I can do that by syncopating, so that pattern. And the harder it gets, the more I have to be sure that the body is neutral. I can also practice some slurring patterns. For example, starting at the tip to do it very slowly. Not something you would normally do, but speeding up, coming towards the middle of the bow. Again, making sure the body is completely neutral. The only two parts that are moving are the two hands. Now, a lot of the repertoire includes triplet figurations, particularly gigs, for example. And we need to learn to play triplet patterns using just the wrist. So if I play, that's supposed to be triplet, but you may not have heard it. What I need to do is to clarify that by accenting, as an exercise, accenting the first of every 3 notes. And I can practice that using this rhythm. Again, starting at the tip, using the maximum amount of bow, and gradually moving towards the middle. And at that point, I can practice the same kind of feeling of impulse on the first of every 3 notes. And I can practice that on Shevchik Opus 1, Book 1, same, but number 5, which has triplet patterns. So if I do that at the tip of the bow using just the wrist, and gradually moving up to the middle of the bow, until I can do that so that the triplets are clear. I can also practice my syncopation, my coordination on the triplet configuration. For example, or and however complicated it is and however difficult it is, I must always remember, let the rest of the body go. So, not that. So that's the basic horizontal movement. And you need to practice that on open strings and also practice it with a chef jig. And you'll soon learn to assimilate that into your playing. And on a future video, I will show you how to make the vertical movements of the wrist and then how to mix the two movements, the vertical and the horizontal. So I hope you enjoy practicing on your right wrist.